a bit of a sound check. Can you all hear me okay? Sometimes my mic goes out. And do you all see just one slide on the screen, not two slides? Yes? Okay, great. So I'd like to begin by going over the format for today. I want to let you know that we are recording this meeting and we're going to upload it to our website. That way we can also be sure to share this conversation and our decisions and just our process with the rest of our Dixon community. We'll ask you to raise your hand if you have a question or a comment. Also, please mute unless you have raised your hand and you'll be speaking. Also, to help limit distractions, please turn off your camera unless you're speaking. Okay. Any questions about the format? No? Okay. Let's review the agenda. We only have about 2 hours together this evening, so we'll be moving fairly quickly through the first parts of the presentation because we really want to be able to focus our time on discussion. We'll start, of course, with introductions. We'll review the district mission, review the Budget Advisory Committee duties. I'll provide a fiscal update, some information about the budget stabilization plan and the process we'll go through when developing the plan, and then we'll get into the heart of our meeting with discussion. So at this time, I'd like to take a moment and do introductions. I'll stop sharing so we can see a bigger screen. And I'll start just the way my screen is going. So for me, I'm Monique Stovall. I am the Chief Business Official. I'll share a little bit about how I'm connected with the district. As I said, I'm the Chief Business Official. I've been with us about 1.5 years now. Brian?
Yes, I'm Brian Dolan. I am the Superintendent of Schools. Nobody's griped about my Seahawk wall hanging since I got it up. It's a gift from a friend of mine in town. So Superintendent of Schools, this is year number 23 for me in Dixon Unified and the start of number 10 as superintendent.
Norma.
Hi, my name is Norma. I am a mom of 2 high school students, one a sophomore and one a senior.
Susie.
Hi, I'm Susie Altieri. I'm SEIU president. I am also part of the educational services at the district office, doing English learner compliance. So Nick is my supervisor. Love working in ed services. It's about my 27th year with the district now. So.
Julie.
Hi, Julie Mustard. I am a graduate of Dixon High School, class of 1985. I have a daughter who is at Dixon High School as a junior, and my son graduated a couple of years ago. I've been on this committee since probably the original one. What was that, Brian, 10 years ago?
Yeah, more, 11.
Thank you. Lorraine.
Hi everyone, I'm Lorraine. I am a parent of a junior at Dixon High and an 8th grader over at CAJ.
Nick.
Hi everybody, Nick Germani, Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Kathy.
I'm Kathy Michaels, and I'm the current DTA president. This is my 4th year at Dixon High School, but it's my 35th year teaching. I started when I was 2.
Welcome, you're a new member, so we're glad to have you. Isaac.
My name is Isaac Brown. I'm the father of a kindergartner and a fourth grader at Anderson Elementary. I do process improvement and kind of budgeting type things for a living. So that's, I think, why I'm here. Thanks.
Cindy.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
You're really low.
Okay, sorry, I was having this problem earlier in another meeting. But Cindy Nguyen from the HR department, happy to be here.
Melissa.
I'm Melissa Masita. I'm currently on the school board. I've been involved with Dixon Schools for 18 years. I have 2 graduates from Dixon High School. I have a current 10th grader and a current 7th grader. And I love Dixon.
Rose.
Hi, I'm Rose Morales. I am Monique's administrative assistant. And I've been working for DUSD since 1998.
And Lloyd.
I'm Lloyd McCabe. I'm a member of the school board. I've been involved in education for 45 years and presently am a lecturer over at UC Davis.
And last but not least, Audrey.
Hi, I'm Audrey. I am the SEIU treasurer and I work at Dixon High School, and I have graduated 3 kids through the Dixon Unified System.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Moving on, I wanted to take a moment to review our district mission, as it's our guiding principle, our true north for everything that we do. So our mission is to close the achievement gap by preparing all students for college and career readiness and success in a global society. As we embark on our conversations related to the budget stabilization plan, and even after this, as we continue with a budget advisory committee in the coming years, we always want to circle back to our mission and make sure that we are basing our decisions based upon this particular mission. I also want to review the budget advisory committee duties. I often call it just the back, and so if you hear me say that term, I'm referring to us. Per our board policy 3100, the budget advisory committee duties are to make recommendations regarding budget priorities, recommending cost reduction strategies, reviewing the clarity and effectiveness of budget documents and communications, and as appropriate, presenting reports to the board. At this time, I'd like to provide a brief fiscal update. As I shared with you in an email, or Rose sent you in an email, we did do a budget workshop for the board on Monday. And so at that time we provided a wealth of detail. We're not going to take the time to go line by line through our budget, so I'm going to provide you a summary. Of course, if you do want additional detail, you can let me know and I can get that to you at a later time. But as I shared, I want to be able to give us the opportunity to focus our time on discussing how we're going to stabilize our budget and get into some broad conversations. A brief history of where we were and where we are now, I think, is appropriate to share and review with us. As a reminder, last September in 2019, we had an unanticipated enrollment decline of over 100 students. In November, we reconvened the Budget Advisory Committee because we knew that having such a steep decline would negatively impact our budget, and we wanted to start planning solutions as quickly as possible. In December, we presented and the board approved our first interim budget. A first interim budget is another word for our quarterly budget. So it was our first quarterly budget. And we certified it as qualified. What that means is that we may not meet our fiscal obligations in the subsequent years. Our fiscal obligations mean that we have at least 3% of our expenditures in our reserves. I like to say 3% of our expenditures in our savings account, for lack of better words. SCO, the Solano County Office of Education, changed that certification to negative. A negative certification means that we are unlikely to meet our fiscal obligations for this year and/or the subsequent years. If a district continues to have a negative certification and is unable to meet its fiscal obligations, that 3% ending fund balance, then we are at risks, and that district is at risk of the state coming in and taking over. We've been in that situation as a district back in 2007, 2008, and we absolutely do not want to get in that situation again. Thus, the reason for the Budget Advisory Committee and the work that we did last year. So in January, the board approved a resolution to reduce expenses, and staff and the Budget Advisory Committee, we conducted budget analysis and were able to come back in March with a second interim budget that was still qualified. However, what's important about this is that we self-certified it as qualified, and the Solano County Office of Education agreed with that certification. So it showed, based upon the information that we had at that time, that we were likely to meet our fiscal obligations at minimum for last year, but we definitely wanted to keep our eye on the years afterwards. Unfortunately, a week after we submitted our second interim budget, we had school closures because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that completely changed our fiscal situation. It changed the global economy, and the effects on school districts have been dire. In May, the governor submitted his May budget revision with 10% cuts to K-12 education. In June, we presented our adopted budget to the board, and that adopted budget included the proposed 10% cuts to education. And at that time, our board approved a budget stabilization resolution that stated that we would stabilize our budget within the coming months. In July, the 2020 State Budget Act was approved, and the governor eliminated some of the cuts to K-12 education. The changes per the Budget Act were so significant that in August, we revised our budget, and it's called a 45-day budget revision to reflect the changes from the Budget Act. And that actually improved our financial situation. Not enough to mean that we don't need a budget stabilization plan, but it helped to improve our bottom line. In September, just a few weeks ago, I presented the unaudited actuals to our governing board. What the 2019-20 unaudited actuals are our actuals, revenue, and expenditures for last year. It's called unaudited simply because the auditors haven't audited it yet. What's important about that particular budget report is it lets us know where we ended in 2019-20 to know where we're beginning this year. We know what we will actually have in our reserves, our savings account, and we know how that will help us in this coming fiscal year, so in the 2021 fiscal year. Before I go on, does anyone have any questions about our fiscal history? No? Okay. So let's take a brief moment to look at the financials. What I'd like to share with you is what our financial picture looked like at our second interim budget report, which is pre-COVID, which is a reflection of the work we did together last year. And then I'll compare that to where we are now while we're in the COVID era. Okay. What's important in looking at this particular slide is comparing where we projected our revenues to be and where we ended up with our revenues. And I'll go through this and provide as much detail as possible. At our second interim budget report, and this was last March pre-COVID, we projected that we would have a decline in enrollment in the 2021 school year. That is the, decline in enrollment in the 2021 school year. And that decline in enrollment would follow into the 2021-22 school year. However, we would steady out in the following school year in 2022-23. That projection follows through last year into this year as well. What's important to look at our revenues is that in 1920, our revenues are higher than 2021. That is because of declining enrollment, because of that 100 student decline. However, our expenditures would eventually begin to level out. If you look at 1920 compared to 2021, you'll see a reduction in expenses. That's because of the reductions that we made last year. But in 21-22, of course, things get more expensive and our expenses would end up rising. Our bottom line for last year and this year, we would be able to add to our savings account. However, in the out years, we would still have a deficit. So we would have a decrease to our reserves, our ending fund balance. When all was said and done, based upon the projections we had at second interim, we would still be able to meet our financial obligations, meaning our ending fund balance percent would meet the minimum 3% ending fund balance that is required by Ed Code. This again was all pre-COVID. And then a week later, we closed because of COVID, and it changed our financial situation significantly. So let's take a peek at what our financial situation looks like now, post-COVID, but based upon our unaudited actuals, where we ended last year and where we project based upon the information we have right now, will end this year. I'll start with reviewing a little more detail in our revenues. Our general purpose revenue, also known as our LCFF revenue, is the revenue that we can use for anything, meaning any expenditures that we have, we can use this for. They're not restricted, and it's the bulk of the revenue we get as a district. You'll see from 1920 to 2021, there's a decline. From 2020 to 2021, there's another decline. However, there's a slight increase. In 2022, you'll see a very sharp decline in our general fund revenue, our general purpose revenue. In 2021, it's important to note that this projection is based upon two important factors. First and foremost, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, our COLA, which will typically increase and give us a small bump in our revenue, was zero. So we based our projections off of zero. Our revenue didn't decline as sharply as it could have based upon our declining enrollment, because the Budget Act had what's called a hold harmless provision in the Budget Act. What the hold harmless provision means is that our ADA, our enrollment for 2021, is based upon 1920. And so we did not have as sharp of a decline in our general purpose revenue, our LCFF revenue, as we could have because of some provisions in our Budget Act. Our federal revenue, you'll see from 1920 to 2021, a sharp increase. If you've had the opportunity to watch any of the budget updates that I've provided over the past few months, you'll know that in 2021, districts received what we call COVID-19 funds, one-time funds to help us to cover the costs related to learning loss due to the distance learning due to COVID-19. This is one-time money. It's a little over $3 million that we received. So when you look at the green column in 2021-22, you'll see a sharp decline. That's because we are not receiving that one-time COVID revenue in the out years. So that brings us to the final picture on our revenue. In 1920, our revenue was about 37.4 million. This year, our revenue is higher, mainly due to the fact that we received that COVID-19 one-time money. Next year, our revenue is down significantly. We're pulling out that COVID-19 money. That is one of the main reasons why our revenue will be down. However, we're hit even worse in 22-23 because of our continued decline in enrollment and our decrease to our LTFF funding. Okay. Next, let's take a peek at our expenditures. Last year, our expenditures ended up being about 37.2 million. This year, naturally, they're higher because when we receive the COVID-19 money, about 3 million, then we need to make sure we spend those funds very quickly. We have until the end of December to spend the majority of this money. In 21-22, our expenditures are down compared to this year because, again, we're not having those COVID expenditures in our budget. However, they will continue to rise as things get naturally more expensive into 22-23. So let's start looking at the bottom line. Last year, we had a net decrease to our ending fund balance of about 118,000. I need to take a peek at that number. I'm sorry. But we'll look at 2020-21. We are projecting a net decrease to our ending fund balance of $860,000. Next year, 2.6 million, and the following 4 million. So what does that do to our ending fund balance percentage? Last year, our ending fund balance was higher than the required 3% at 9%. This year, we project that we'll continue to meet our financial obligations at 5%. However, in 2021-22, we don't meet the 3% minimum. We are projecting that we'll be at 1%. And the following year, our reserves will be completely gone, and we project a negative ending fund balance. Let's take a side-by-side view of the changes in our ending fund balance. Just a reminder, the 2021-22 ending fund balance is projected to be below the Ed Code required 3%. You'll see here what a dramatic shift that we are experiencing, mainly due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2021-22, at second interim, we projected that we would have a 6.5% ending fund balance. Now we're projecting that we will be below the 3% at a 1% ending fund balance. And as I've shared, then we're projecting that our fund balance, meaning our savings account, our reserves, will be depleted by 22-23. So in summary, a 0% COLA, or cost of living adjustment, decreases our LTFF funding. And that's what we've experienced this year and will experience in the out years based upon the information we have at this time. In 2021, that one-time hold harmless provision bases enrollment and attendance off of 2019-20, and that helps to support the general fund expenditures for this year only. The 2020-21 one-time revenue supports learning loss and additional COVID-related expenses. Those are the COVID one-time expenses. We project that there will be a sharp decline in revenue in 22-23 due to declining enrollment. Without reductions, we will have a negative certification. As I mentioned previously, a negative certification puts us at risk of having the state coming in and taking us over. The other thing we have to account for is that we still do not know the full economic impact of the pandemic. The situation may get worse, it may get better, but we're basing everything that we are doing right now off of the information that we have right now. Okay. So I want to take a moment and stop before we go on to the budget stabilization plan and ask if anyone has any questions.
Susie is in line at this point.
Okay. Yes, Susie.
Hi, Monique. I was just wanting to refresh my memory of some of the work we did last year. I know that there was a lot of work surrounding each site administrator and the work that they did to reduce their budgets. And what was the overall number of what was saved last year due to those reductions that they had?
So the net amount was a little over $900,000.
Okay. I couldn't quite remember what it was, so I just want to refresh my memory. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Seeing Kathy's hand.
Hello. So being a newbie at this, please be patient with me on dumb questions. I'm wondering whether your projections for enrollment are based on the most dire situation, or are they based on positive situation, or are they based on a neutral situation?
We thought we based it on the most dire and conservative situation pre-pandemic. And I'll give a little bit of background on how we came up with our projections for enrollment. We looked at our trend data and we used what's called the Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistant Team. They are a premier resource in school finance, and they projected out what our enrollment would be over the next few years. And then we brought in the subjective data because FCMAT, which is the acronym and how it's commonly referred to for Fiscal Crisis Management Assistant Team, FCMAT is looking at pure numbers, but we wanted to bring in our knowledge of our district. And so we took the FCMAT recommendations and actually decreased it so that we would try to make sure that we're having conservative projections.
And that's for the pre-COVID projections, or is that including the COVID projections?
That is pre-COVID.
So we can anticipate even more enrollment issues if people don't return from other schooling systems.
You are correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions?
Melissa's hand is up.
Well, and maybe mine's more of a comment, but maybe just to confirm. So what we had planned for budget for enrollment this year, it ended up being a whole lot less students than what we had originally planned conservatively, but we lost more students than we planned. Can you just, how many did we plan for, and then how many did we lose altogether so far?
I can pull that up really quickly.
Sorry.
Okay. I know I shared that with Brian last week. Last year for 2019, for 2020-21, we planned for 3,029 students. And Brian, where are we now?
We are about, actually, let me.
I believe we're at 3,003. Is that correct?
2956, Brian.
Oh, wow.
Okay, thanks. I knew it was a lot less than what we had originally planned conservatively for, but I just wanted to confirm that.
Yes. Other questions? Looks like Susie, you have another question?
Seeing Isaac's hand.
Oh, Isaac.
Hi. So given the circumstance, I'm wondering, if from your perspective, we're seeing the same type of challenges in other school districts, and how we think that will affect things like the 3% requirement, because the states, I don't imagine the state taking over all the schools that are having all these problems, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are on there. Do you think there will be any changes to the requirements as we move forward, or do we just not speculate in this meeting and kind of go forward given the current circumstance?
I think it's worth having or sharing information and my thoughts and what I'm hearing and seeing on that particular issue. Every district is affected by COVID-19. That's a fact. How deeply they're affected is dependent on what their financial situation was prior to the pandemic. Those who had a very healthy ending fund balance, meaning the reserves or savings account, are not going to be as affected as we are. Those who are in our situation where we had just, and I use the words, we just crawled ourselves out of a tough financial situation, however, our ending fund balance was still low, are going to be in the situation that we're in right now. I have seen some colleagues where their district, they thought they were just doing great. And just like us in the out years, based upon what we know now, they are likely to have a qualified certification. Do I think that the 3% minimum is going to go anywhere? Absolutely not. I think that districts need to have a minimum, and I reiterate, that's a minimum of 3%. 3% ending fund balance is really supposed to be there just to make sure that we can pay our employees. And we want to do more than pay our employees. We need to make sure that we are able to support our students so that they can get a quality education.
Okay, Susie's hand is back up, then Audrey's, and then Lorraine's. Go ahead, Susie.
Actually, that must have been from last time. I didn't again.
Mea culpa. Audrey.
So last year when we did the budget meeting and we were talking about reduced enrollment, we had a breakdown of where we lost the enrollment by grade, or by grade level. Do we have that breakdown this year? Because it seems like I've heard that a lot of parents of TK and kindergarten students just opted not to put their kids into school this year because of that. So I'd like to see a breakdown of where the drop in enrollment was.
So I shared a pretty detailed review of that data last week at the board meeting. Was that just last week?
Mm-hmm.
I think so, yes. Very recently, because I can't remember any amount of time anymore. So I will share that out with everybody. If you want to watch the whole presentation, it is on the agenda from last week's regular governing board meeting. We do have it spelled out by grade level, and there's a little bit of, it's a little bit misleading when you look at that, because you have a group of 270 kids come out of 8th grade into 9th grade, and then you have a group of 195 kids come in. So there's a temptation to say, oh my gosh, kids are fleeing C.A. Jacobs because of program or because of environment or whatever, when in fact it's just that you've got smaller groups of kids coming through. So I will share that with you, and we also, and we're not done with it yet, but we did it last year as well. We are tracking down where students went. If they're enrolled in a California public school, we are able to know exactly where they went. Keith from our IT department ran that for me last Wednesday, I think it was. We still had about 40 kids of that recent decline who we didn't know where they were. And we did see an uptick in online charters and privates. And our numbers with TK and K are not radical. Well, TK is down, oh boy, probably 20 from where it was at the start of last year. So that is certainly potential. The delay parents have chosen. Our K is not down that much, but I have been reading things statewide. Kindergarten TK numbers are down.
Any more questions?
Lorraine is next.
I just wanted to make a comment. Monique had shared at a previous meeting that the average recommended ending fund balance for our schools is actually 17%. And that was a new fact for me. And I just wanted to make sure that this group knew that as we move forward.
Yes, thank you, Lorraine. Yes, on average, unified school districts ending fund balance is 17%. We're not there, as we know that. Any other questions? Okay, let's continue. So let's talk about the budget stabilization plan. The board approved a budget stabilization plan at our June 18th, 2020 meeting. As I had shared, that was when we presented our adopted budget. Some key components of that resolution was to commit to implement ongoing budget reductions to meet financial obligations. In doing so, we want to make sure that we make every effort to sustain high quality education programs for our students. We were directed by the board to implement the necessary budget adjustments in the first interim budget report. That's our next quarterly report, for lack of better words, and submit a detailed budget stabilization plan and implementation timeline at the first interim budget report in December. For the budget reductions, we had a meeting on Monday, and at that time, the governing board directed management to reduce the budget to ensure a minimum of a 5% ending fund balance. We currently project that we need to reduce our budget about $3.8 million of ongoing expenses over the next 3 years. It's important that we focus on the word ongoing expenses. We anticipate that because of distance learning, we will see a reduction in some expenses this year, but that's one time, because as our students come back to us, those expenses are likely to increase. It's also important to note that the total amount of reductions is affected by when the reductions are made. The sooner we make the reductions, the better. There we go. So let's talk about our timeline. Our timeline is fast and furious. Between September 21st and October 23rd, we'll be meeting with our committees and stakeholders. On November 5th, we will present the budget stabilization plan to the board for approval. This all needs to be done. That way, we are able to put those reductions and those changes into the first interim report that is scheduled to be presented to the board on December 10th. I want to review our stakeholder meetings. Last night, we did present this information as well. However, we've added some meetings to it. So if you saw it last night, especially Lloyd, Melissa, and Lorraine, who were at the budget workshop on Monday, you'll see slight changes here. We will be meeting, of course, as the Budget Advisory Committee. Right now, we have scheduled 3 meetings. We'll also meet with the Board Budget Subcommittee. We have 2 meetings and we'll meet as needed. We also have management meetings scheduled. We'll meet with our labor groups, and then we'll also provide updates at our Board of Education meetings. Our guiding questions are questions that will guide our conversations, set priorities, and provide direction for the budget stabilization plan development. There are 10 questions that we will be asking all of our stakeholders as a whole, but the questions will be directed to specific groups. I'll review these questions. However, please recognize that some of the questions are going to be more relevant and appropriate for specific groups to answer. So these are the guiding questions. The first question that we will be asking ourselves as a district as we go through this budget stabilization plan is, are there any expenses which we can move from the unrestricted general budget to restricted budgets? Are there ways to reduce spending on department or site management? Are there any situations where we can consolidate expenditures? Is there a way to reduce extra personnel costs? Are there areas where we are providing excessive levels of service compared to other districts? Are there any services or standalone programs which we believe can be reduced, eliminated, or provide ourselves at a reduced cost? Are there past budget cuts that were effective and or we can take advantage of rejected budget cuts from the past? Is there any work where the cost exceeds the value? Are there overdue or technical personnel actions which we can take? And finally, are there ways to minimize the impact of pay increases? These are the questions we'll be asking as we go through the budget stabilization plan development process. So now I want to bring us to our discussion. I want to remind us one more time of what the budget advisory duties are. Per board policy, again, we are to make recommendations regarding budget priorities, recommend cost reduction strategies, review the clarity and effectiveness of budget documents and communications, and present progress reports to the board. Okay. Before I go on and we start looking at the budget, the guiding questions for the Budget Advisory Committee, does anyone have any questions about the timeline or the stakeholders or even the resolution for the budget stabilization plan?
No hands up. Monique?
Okay. So for the Budget Advisory Committee, we have 4 key questions that we want to bring to you to discuss and provide some information and some ideas and some recommendations for. The first question is, are there past budget cuts that were effective and or we can take advantage of rejected budget cuts from the past? The second question is there any work where the cost exceeds the value? The third question is, are there areas where we are providing excessive levels of service compared to other districts? And the fourth question is, are there any services or standalone programs which we believe can be reduced, eliminated, or provide ourselves at a reduced cost? The way that we'll go about discussing these questions is we'll start with the first question.
Can I ask 2 quick questions? I'm sorry for interrupting.
Absolutely.
I know that's totally rude, but I'm a little bit lost on this. So unrestricted funds are specific funds like for special ed and the like, correct?
Great question, Kathy. I'm glad that you asked it. So there are 2 types of funds or I'll say pots of money in school district: unrestricted and restricted. Luckily, the terminology isn't that hard to understand once you break the word down. Restricted, there's restrictions on how we spend that money. That's our special ed, that's our title, that's our, let me think of it, our cafeteria funds. Those are restricted funds. They can be used for only certain purposes. Unrestricted is unrestricted. We can use it for anything that we need to within our budget. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay. Any other questions before I go on? Okay. So the format that we would like to use when we're discussing these questions is presenting each question. The team and anyone else who has input will provide some background information to help us to have some history when we're discussing these particular questions. We'll still use the raise your hand option. And then what I'll also be doing is using, and I'll bring it onto the screen, a document to be able to record. Can you see this particular spreadsheet right here that says Budget Stabilization Plan, Budget Advisory Committee?
Yes.
Yes. I'll be using this particular document to capture our ideas. So any reduction that we have for consideration, I will capture it here. I'll include our rationale. And then as we go through the process, whether or not we determine that we want to make that reduction that we've discussed for consideration, if we want to propose that to the board. So that's how we'll capture a bit of the discussion. We want it to be a flow of information, a good discussion. And so I'll just be taking notes. And then thankfully we do have this meeting as a reminder recorded so that we can really be able to capture our conversation. Questions?
Susie.
Monique, some of the work we did last year on the committee, you provided us with really detailed spreadsheets of exactly where the money was being spent. It's a little bit difficult to make determinations and recommendations when we don't know exactly where the money was spent. Will you be providing that for us, those detailed lists of line by line items of where the money was spent, or where it will be spent this year, or projections of things that have been already determined that you're going to have to spend this year, so we could have a better understanding of, of particular things that we're going to consider that we would recommend?
Can I jump in on that one first, Monique?
Absolutely.
Part of what we want to do differently from last year, and thanks for that question, Susie, because it's one of the things we need to talk about tonight. Part of what we want to do this year is have you tell us what's important, and we don't what are the priorities, and we don't think we did it so much last year as the model of okay, what can we cut, and in that situation, it really is, it feels like you have to have all of those numbers in front of you from the get-go. I'll tell you my own take on last year with some of the numbers is we got way too micro and we kind of got out in the weeds with some of them. I think as we went along, the numbers got more refined. And Monique has provided the board in the past with a document. I think she showed it in Monday's meeting that shows, I don't know, it's just a few pages, I think, Monique, right? But it shows all the major expenditure areas in a very summarized way. And part of what came out on Monday was the board wanting to see the detail on the things that it's less obvious what we're spending. So it might have been Melissa actually used the example of water's water. We get what water is. I don't want to see a breakdown on that. Consultants, outside services, some of the facilities things where there is a real need. So in these meetings that we only have 3 of them before our stabilization plan has to be ready, we're concerned about going way, way, way into detail and not having really your recommendations about, you know what, guys, here's the things that we really think are most important. Go prioritize reductions to try to keep those things in place to the degree possible. So it's a little bit of a shift in approach from what we did last year, and it might not work for folks, right? And Monique, you add on to any of that, and we're certainly open to, we need to give you guys what you need. to do your jobs here. So we're open to any direction, but that is part of our thinking this year. So Monique?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. You know, a term that I use and a term that I think about is the fact that we know we are not going to get to the 3.8 million off of pens and pencils. We know that. We know that in order to make the level of reductions over the next 3 years that we need to make, we have to think big picture, systems, behaviors, how we're doing business. At this point, I encourage us to think about what Brian said. What are our priorities? What is important to us? When we look down at the bottom of the slide, this is our mission. This is our guiding principle. What programs and services are our priorities that as we're looking at the different programs, we do not touch, as Brian said. As we continue our conversation and as I'm gathering the information, especially on that spreadsheet that I just showed, those reductions for consideration, after we have that conversation to say, okay, is this something we want to consider? Then I can bring to you and share with you, maybe even before, hopefully before our next meeting, what that cost would be. But I want to be careful about getting into the weeds, for lack of better words, and getting so hyper-focused on one particular area when we don't have as much time afforded to us to be able to focus on, for lack of better words, the items that won't make as big of an impact on our budget as a whole. So it's not that I don't plan to bring you those finances. They're very important to our conversation, but we need to look and see where our priorities are, what our overall recommendations are, and then we're able to identify if that's going to get us to where we need to be.
We have managed to get 5 hands up in this recent discussion. So Audrey is up first, then Isaac.
So we have been in this position before. It was almost a decade ago. So do we have historical records of what kind of cuts? Because obviously this conversation happened at that time also. So is there a historical record of what we cut at that time? And is there a reflection on which one of those cuts were beneficial and which ones were detrimental? And is there some accounting of how where we have added on to the budget since that time of us coming out? Where have we gained the most expenses in what areas? I'm just curious to know, as our budget has grown from that time, or our expenditures from that time when we were really lean and mean, where has the majority of our expenditures been going from that point? Because I think since we do have a historical record of having to make some very deep cuts to many programs, it would benefit us to know, to reflect back on what happened in the past, and so that we don't necessarily make cuts to programs that were not beneficial before, or that maybe weren't as beneficial.
Great question, Audrey, and it fits in with one of those guiding questions, right? So I guess I was the executioner back then. I was doing the HR work. So I did all of the layoff notices to certificated classified folks. I will give you a brief summary on this. I think it's important that we do, but then I'm also going to say I don't think we use that period of time as our model for a few different reasons. So beginning in the spring of 2008, we closed a school. We eliminated transportation. We increased class sizes in the primary grades from 20 to 29. We eliminated PE teachers. We had a period of time where we eliminated sports. We got rid of some specialist reading support positions, things of that nature. We closed libraries. Well, let me see what else. So we reduced some nursing services and not nursing, I guess, but health techs, some other health services. We did very, very little at the secondary level because you didn't have a lot of those quote unquote extras, not extras at all. But secondary was leaner just because you have your standard classes and none of those kind of add-ons. So we conducted layoffs beginning in 2008, and we did one every year through 2012. And since then, we did a certificated layoff in 2019, and here in 2020, we did both a certificated and classified layoff. And those were really in response to declining enrollments. We had fewer and fewer kids coming. So those were, some people call it right sizing, but it really was adjusting to the number of students we have. So what have we built back in since we went scorched earth? We restored, so we haven't returned transportation. We remain with that school closed. We restored lower class sizes in primary, but the new model is 24 instead of 20. We restored PE teachers. We added science teachers. We've added intervention teachers. We've added parent liaisons. We've added LVNs in all the school offices. We have added some EL supports in school offices. We have added mental health clinicians and services. So there's been a whole lot of growth that has happened starting in about 2012. Much of it funded through the supplemental concentration grant dollars, which technically are unrestricted funds. So technically use it for any purpose, but under law, you are required to make those expenditures on behalf of the students in the unduplicated count. So students who are on the free or reduced lunch program, are English learners, or our foster youth. And so much of that stuff that I rattled off there, intervention teachers being a very large part of it, a good chunk of our mental health services, a number of those classified services as well, are SCG funded. So we have an obligation with those dollars to target services for the students who have generated those dollars by being on that list of unduplicated students. So that, I don't know if that took 5 minutes or so, but that is about the 5-minute summary. And just to roll back, I think if I rolled back and said, what did we learn from that 5-year period of layoffs? We learned a few things. A couple of them are very obvious. Cutting valuable programs leads to, it leads to bad outcomes, right? Schools were less engaging, less productive, less successful, harder on students, harder on staff, all those things. And at this point in time, we're a very different looking school district with regards to the services that we provide. Those ELD intervention teachers, we had very little of that previously. Parent liaisons, hadn't dreamt of them. Mental health stuff, knew it was need, hadn't lifted a finger on it. There's a whole bunch of things that are new that I think beg this new conversation and not going back. We have all the board resolutions and budget reports and everything that we can pull. But my encouragement is that we acknowledge those were really horrible times, that we did impact programs and services enormously, that we should consider what we have now, not what we had then, and also understand with the size of the holes that we have coming, we're still going to have to touch programs and services. It's just the question of in 2020, 2021, which ones should it be as opposed to the old ones. So I will stop. And Isaac is up.
Yeah, so when I'm looking at the mission, it was just up. It's not down, or it's down now, but it looks like we're wanting the kids to be able to get to college, be able to get into careers and have success in society. I guess one of my questions is, in the different discussions that have been had previously, has there been any research into which programs are actually contributing the most to those things? So for the kids who are having lots of science classes, they tend to go to college the most or are able to find jobs the best, et cetera, et cetera. You were talking basketball earlier. So if we're talking win shares here, which players are contributing to the wins? Which classes, programs, et cetera, are helping us the most to achieve these things? To me, having some sort of insight into that would help to guide the conversation. I don't know that we have it, but it seems like it would be nice to know that the program that we're looking at cutting, let's take sports, because that's one that's always kind of brought up in these budget discussions. If we're finding that those kids who are participating in sports are tending to be able to go to college and are having great careers, even if they're not actually in sports, and it's helping to achieve those missions, then maybe that's not something we look at. I'll stop right there, but that's kind of the general idea of the question and comment there.
Great series of questions. Nick, I forget the name of the book, and I think you have it on your shelf, the meta study. So if you get ready to speak to that in a moment, if you don't mind, it is something that we refer back to. So Isaac, I would say hit and miss with data, probably more miss than hit. And then it's, what's the correlation, I guess is part of the question too. Our, band as an example, band typically has a lot of high achieving students, and we know music is good for brain development and such. However, are good students drawn to band, or does band develop good students? Chicken and egg a little bit. Our student athletes do have higher grades. That one gets looked at routinely, do have higher grade point averages than our non-athletes. So again, are the athletics part of the cause of that, or not? There is certainly research out there in broad and kind of in broad strokes that I'll have Nick talk to now. There's some of it we refer back to routinely. I'll give you, just before I have Nick go, AVID is something that we have embraced widely across the district. And there is there's a great deal of evidence of AVID's effectiveness across the country. Never mind Dixon, but across the country. And so that's been part of it. Kathy, I think your dog is barking.
Sorry.
That's okay. Part of our embrace of AVID is because there's so much data from across the country with positive outcomes, and AVID is focused on students underrepresented in colleges, first generation college students, those types of things. I see Mr. Germani put it in the chat. The name of the book is Visible Learning by John Hattie. I think he's an Australian. And you can see it's a synthesis of meta-analysis. Mr. G, talk about it just a little bit for us, please.
Yeah, it's pretty wonky. But if you're looking for a good go-to-sleep read, I would suggest it. But really what it does is it takes sort of large scale look at the things that people try across the world when it comes to education and measures essentially their effectiveness on student achievement. So every sort of initiative or type of program, it doesn't get into specifics. Like there's not going to be one on something like Avid per se, but one that I'm really familiar with is retention, for example. Like if you have retention programs for students, it examines like what happens when you retain kids. What do all the studies that's ever happened around retention tell us about the effectiveness of holding kids back from the grade level peers, and then assigns it a score essentially as far as its effectiveness, or in the case of retention, its actual damage to kids if they have that happen to them. So that's kind of the basic gist of it.
Thanks, Nick. Kathy's hand is up.
So thank you. I'm sorry about the dogs. I usually try and keep them quiet, but they're not always cooperative. Anyway, my thing is two questions, a question and a comment. One is it fair to say that our salaries take up about 75, 80% of the budget? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, salaries and benefits combined are right about that. Yeah, 78, 80% of our budget. Yes.
Okay.
All groups, all employees.
Right. So I think one of the biggest things that we have to really consider in doing this is that we have to be transparent. It's one of the issues we have a little bit in this district, that there's a perception of not transparency about how things are decided about this. And I think that in terms of certainly the DTA, nobody's going to be happy about the cuts, but we know they're going to be layoffs. That's where a chunk of this has to come from. And so if we make it really transparent as to where this is going and how it's being done, I think it will be less painful in many ways. So that's just my comment.
And a great point. And, I think we've improved, started budget updates last year. Monday's meeting was productive. And as Monique said at the start, we're going to post these meetings for people to be able to watch as well. And actually, I'm delinquent. I'm going to send the link out to Monday's meeting. It was a quick notice and back to school night at Dixon High. So I will be posting that link out for people to be able to watch that more easily, not having to go to look for it. So we agree, Kathy, on the transparency thing. There can never be enough. We haven't always batted 1,000. I think we're a little bit better, but still always room to improve. Okay, Julie Mustard.
A question kind of along the lines of Kathy's. In the spring, when we were still in school board meetings, and Lloyd was sitting next to me, which is with his photographic memory, he will probably remember, there were a huge amount of layoffs, like 26 FTE. I don't know what actually ended up happening with that. I mean, I remember hearing something on the news, like there could be no layoffs in the state of California because of COVID. I would just like an update going forward of what layoffs actually really happened.
That's great. That's information that we can provide for you really easily. At the time we said we knew we were going deeper than we'd prefer, because you don't have course requests in at high school and C.A. Jacobs. So there's some precautionary stuff. You also don't have your kinder registration in. So you're being careful there. So what we had on our March resolution is not what happened in the end.
Okay.
As you actually implemented numbers of kids and course requests and those types of things. My report last week, got to conclusion. Secondary, we're really tightly staffed to contract to our ratios. There are certainly classrooms that are exceptions to the idea of 29-to-1, but our ratio, again, to remind you, 29-to-1 school-wide from 4th grade on up, and 20-to-1 at Main Prairie, and the 24-to-1 in the lower grades. So that data, I will send you that data, and it's illustrative of the fact that we're pretty well staffed. We did downsize, even though we had a bigger drop in enrollment than we had projected. We had downsized to a point where we've been able to absorb that without having a lot of a lot of empty chairs out there, which is, when you have a bunch of empty chairs, you have overstaffed. So Cindy will be able to provide that information, or we'll funnel it to one place. Maybe we'll funnel all the information to Monique and have her distribute that, but we'll be able to give you that report tomorrow. Monique, I'm not seeing any other hands up at this point. And Monique, we cannot hear you. So in the words of millions of America, Monique, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you for those questions. I actually did capture those questions to make sure that we were able to just keep track of our conversation. So I want to go back to our guiding questions. And the first one is, are there past budget cuts that were effective and or we can take advantage of, or rejected budget cuts from the past? I think that the first question that we had, Brian reviewed what some of those budget cuts were, but I think it is appropriate to take a moment, Brian, and I'll ask you or anyone else that was here and part of that conversation in the past, were there some things that maybe we considered in the past that we want to revisit?
Bueller. Bueller.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question, and just a note.
Oh, Lorraine's hand went up. Sorry, Lorraine got her hand up there.
I don't know that my comment is directly to address the past budget cuts that were effective that we could try to maybe learn from or take advantage of again. But I'm also wondering if maybe we could reframe that in terms of some current practices that we've had to embrace through this distance learning that maybe we want to consider in keeping because they're just that much more cost effective to do them remotely. We have never been in this situation before, and we're doing everything new and different. And I know for my employer, we're already, in many employers across the nation, we're already looking to see what practices that we were forced into are we going to keep in the long run because it's less expensive. And in some cases, it's even more accessible to, folks like students and parents than it was in the past.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Lorraine.
Thank you.
Yeah, not, again, part of my takeaway from that there is not looking backwards. Let's look where we are right now and see what we can apply. Yeah. Mr. Giovanni has his hand up.
Yeah, I don't know, Brian, if I didn't catch you mention this, but I do recall in the last downturn when we were forced into this situation, there was a sweep, it was called a sweeping of the time of our categorical funds, so that there was some loosening of the restrictions for our unrestricted dollars, save for our federal dollars, if I remember correctly. And that allowed for some districts to be able to allowed districts to be able to be a little more flexible with their spending and help the bottom line. That has not yet happened in 2020, nor is there a conversation about that happening that we're aware of, correct?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think it's very unlikely. There was just some state law adopted that will require districts to account for and then spend SCG funding from this year, next year. So if the money is not expended, SCG dollars not expended this year, then we have to know what that dollar amount is and expend it on SCG purposes next year. And the sweeping that happened back then, there were about 50, it was 49 or 50 or 51 state categorical programs, state restricted budget lines. And we didn't receive all of them by any means. And it was the state categoricals that were swept. You could spend them as you wished. And that's how a lot of places survived, was living off of basically that time's version of SCG with tight rules. They took the rules off. And so people used those dollars to survive and eliminated the intended programs for students. That's what happened back then. Susie's hand is up.
One of my questions is that we've discussed what we've done in the past, a lot of the programs that were eliminated, as well as things that we're going to look at now to eliminate. But what were the past budget cuts that were not including staff and programs that were tied to students that we did? What was some of that work? I'd be curious to know that. What I'm talking particularly is what money was saved with contracts or PDs or things that were farther away from staffing and students that we did back in 2008 that weren't just positions or programs. Do we have any of that information?
Oh, yeah, we could try to dig that out. I will tell you that professional development back then was nothing like professional development today.
Yeah.
Not even remotely close.
Right.
I
just threw out a something that would be a cost savings.
Yep. It's a good area for us to think about, Susie, and we certainly can look at what did we do for this year with this year's budget, which we did make reductions in. What had we done? We had some mid-year tightening in 1920. So there's some current data on that fits the model that we use for PD at this point in time. Frankly, we weren't doing a lot of PD back 10 years ago. And what we did was different. I mean, we didn't have district-wide instructional programs, really. We had each elementary site still at that point was much to their own. I think, and I appreciated Monique putting the presentation together with the mission right up front. We didn't have a clear mission in the district back then. And so I'm pleased that we have that as a vehicle for us to do this work right now, something to reflect back to. So I think your point is a good non-personnel expenditures.
Right. That's what I'm more interested in seeing, and I would rather see programs and staffing as the last resort. But for example, what are we spending in consultants? What are we spending in those types of things that are farther away from programs and staffing?
Yeah. And that's the information Monique is already tasked with refining for the board, and it will be shared with everybody else as well.
Yes, I am. Any other questions before we go on to the next question? And just a note, even though we're moving on to another question, it doesn't mean that we're finished with the first question. Okay. Share my screen one more time. So the next question is, and I think in some
Actually,
way,
if I can, sorry, Monique, I'm going to jump in. Just looking at the last question, and this is, I wish I weren't going to talk about this, but I will. Just the second part of the question, rejected budget cuts from the past. So one of the things that people did back in the Great Recession days, law changed, and school year was shortened by 5 days, and people were furloughed as a cost savings device. I don't know if it's safe to say most places did that. Many places did that. And in some places that was a way to lay off less or eliminate fewer programs. In some places it was necessary to do both. So in Dixon, we never reached a point, and this flexibility does not currently exist in law, but in Dixon, we never got anywhere near the point of shortening that year or doing furloughs, salary reductions, benefit reductions. any of those kinds of things at all. It's part of the reason, realistically speaking, it's part of the reason why we had to go so hard at programs, was that we didn't take that approach with concessions, employee concessions. So I just, looking at that question one last time, I think rejected. I'm not advocating for that approach at all, but I think that piece of the history is just worth highlighting for a moment. And now I'm going to be quiet.
Mute it. Thank you, Brian. Our next question: is there any work where the cost exceeds the value? This is I think a big question, and it's getting to our programs. I like to think of it as, are there programs that we implemented that we're just not getting from it what we had planned to get from it when we had launched the program? Are there programs that are really important to us, that are just near and dear to our heart? However, they're too expensive, and we're not getting what we had planned to get out of it. It's not as effective as we had hoped that they would be. Brian, do you want to add anything to that, or Nick even adding to that for the particular types of programs that we've implemented over the last few years?
I see Susie's hand up, so I'm going to let her jump in. I'll give you one example just before I get Susie in. So we have a community day school that currently has 8 students enrolled. The students there, some are there voluntarily because of the struggles they had at their comprehensive site. I think we have 1 middle school student there now. We have some from Dixon High, and there's one, I think just one, who was enrolled in Main Prairie and then went to the day school. So that program fluctuates between 7 to 15 students in any given year. Currently, we have 8 there. The enrollment tends to grow as the year goes on, but it's a program where students come and go very rapidly. A lot of transiency in there. It has the cost of a full-time teacher and a 6-hour paraprofessional. So that's a lot of cost. And we're talking about the lives of 8 students here. So there's no way to minimize that. But are there other ways we could serve those students and provide them value at a less expensive price tag? That's the kind of thing I guess we're looking for, and that's a pretty narrow example. There's nothing like the day school anywhere else. But are the question, restate the question, are there things we're doing that just aren't worth the money? And Susie, you're up.
Okay, I just wanted to touch on the food service program. I know we've struggled for the last several years, and we've discussed it. We've seen some of these struggles that they've had in terms of spending more than what we should be spending on this particular program. We need to feed our students. That's clear, and we know that needs to happen. But we're spending a lot more money than we should be on this. So what kind of work, where are we on that, and what kind of work has been done since last year when we were discussing it?
I can provide an update on that. We've done a lot of work in the food service program over the past few years. The general fund has been contributing to the program. As some of you may or may not know, I hail from a food service world. I'm a registered dietitian, so feeding our students and making sure that they're healthy is important to me. It's also my philosophy that the food service program should not encroach on the general fund, meaning that the general fund should not have to support the food service programs. That's the way that it was designed, to be self-sufficient, unless the board gives directions that they want to continue specific programs within food services or, a specific style of operations. The work that I did with Jesse, our food service manager last year, pre-COVID, based upon our projections, the general fund would not continue supporting the food service program beginning this year in 2021. And so we were able to work together to turn that around so that we can get the food service program self-sufficient. However, COVID-19 occurred. I'll give you an example of some of the challenges, some major challenges that the food service program is experiencing this year that is strictly due to COVID. Typically, we serve about 1,200 meals a day. And today, Jesse sent me a message and let me know that we served 483 meals a day. So general fund or other funding will have to support the food service program this year. However, it's our plan to ensure as soon as we can to get the program self-sufficient again. We need to get out of this COVID environment. Just because we're in the COVID environment doesn't mean that we're not doing everything we can to encourage obtaining a stabilized budget. It's just going to be a bit harder until we get through this current pandemic. Other questions?
Isaac's hand is up.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring up one thing that I had actually brought up at our previous BACs. One thing that I guess we could look into, and I don't have the answers on this one, but I know there was technology that was installed at Anderson at a pretty high cost, or I guess relatively high cost. I think it was close to $100,000. And then training was never provided to the teachers on how to use it. And talking with some of the teachers, they say it just kind of sits there. I don't know about that item in particular, but are there technology things that we bought for the district thinking that they would be great, but they haven't really been adopted, and we're paying for them on a subscription basis or anything of that nature that we might say, you know what, we thought this was great, but we tried to work with it. It's not really doing what we hoped it would. Maybe we get rid of that for the upcoming years. A second thing that I wanted to bring up, and this is granted a little bit outside the box, but when I look at the work that's done by the teachers in providing lesson plans for their children, if we've got three elementary schools with several classes per grade, and they're all putting together their own lesson plans and that type of thing for each one, rather than having a single lesson plan that everybody's using in across that grade for that type of lesson. I just don't know how all that works, but it's a lot of effort that could be consolidated.
Isaac, can I clarify your last one from my understanding? Are you recommending that we look at having one lesson plan for all schools so that we don't have people spending time and resources on creating individual lesson plans?
That's a possibility there. And not necessarily one person doing all those lesson plans, but if I am a teacher who would normally spend their time doing lesson plans plus other things, and teaching and grading and doing all these things, but now maybe twice a week or 3 times a week, I don't have to prepare a lesson plan because one of the other teachers in the district has already put together something great, and I can basically just teach it, but not have to do all the prep work. That might allow me to use those hours in a different way that might be able to reduce other costs. So I know that was very general. I'm just throwing some ideas out there. Thanks.
Thank you for the clarification. Other questions or suggestions?
Audrey's hand is up.
So, do we have any answers for regarding the food service question? I mean, because we are so reduced in serving students the way that we're doing it now, have we looked at other models of serving food to students, like going to them directly, like maybe looking to see where the hubs are in the neighborhoods, where the kids are located, and delivering the food to them? Because if the kids that are needing the food, they may not have transportation to get to the school sites or the means to get there to get the food. So are we looking outside of the box to find ways to get the food to them, which then would alleviate some of the support of the program, because we would be feeding more kids?
Great question. Absolutely. We are investigating whether or not we can do hubs. We're also looking at, is there a way that maybe we can provide meals for multiple days to families, so they only need to pick up meals on Mondays or Fridays or something like that. We're talking with other districts to see what they're doing. So we're looking at every creative means that we can to be able to, primarily, the focus is making sure that our students get a healthy meal. And luckily we can say our kids in our community get a healthy meal, but also so that we are able to generate revenue to be able to support the food service expenditures. So yes, we are looking at other avenues. Other questions?
No more hands right now, Monique.
Any other comments or any other discussion on this particular question? Is there any work where the cost exceeds the value?
I'm sorry, I was going to jump in on that and just say I think we do need to look at how much value, and I know this is sacrosanct a little bit, but to look at how much money we're spending on Avid and whether we are effectively using that money. You know, if we're paying $5,000 for a presenter, maybe we don't have a keynote speaker or something. You know, it's chump change, but it might be something that we want to look at.
Thank you. And I think it's important to reiterate, and maybe I haven't shared this, we need to discuss everything. Avid is very important to us. However, everything has to be open for discussion and dialogue, so that we can be able to say, we have identified this is a priority for our district, and this is the funding for it, and this is how we're going to continue implementing it in our district. Any other questions or comments about this particular question?
Monique, this is Lloyd.
Hi, Lloyd.
Could it be, it's hard to, and I wasn't going to say anything, but it's hard to answer these questions when we don't have, the district office probably has a list of things that may or may not be working. And could it be that you guys will present that list to us and say, what do you value? I mean, would that perhaps move this faster? Because when you ask some of these questions, I'm at a loss of how to comment on them because I don't have the background at all. And maybe the other folks on the committee do have the background, and they can just say, yeah, this is important, this is not important. But once again, I think it would be more constructive if you or the superintendent would present ideas to us and say, here are some options for you to look at. What do you think? And then we make decisions based on what you present to us. Just a suggestion anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Lloyd. I'll take that first, if you don't mind, Monique. So, you know, we purposely didn't do that tonight These questions, we wanted to lay a foundation of knowledge, background on the budget situation. And so Monique, as usual, did a really good job with that. These questions should get your wheels turning, hopefully. We have what I call Superintendent's Council tomorrow with all of our administrators in attendance. And we're going to do these questions with them, in essence, tomorrow for the first time. And we have been working already on things that we're going to call, for tonight's purposes, and this may be reworded, core and non-core, or basically required and elective. Organized by elementary, organized by secondary, organized by district-wide. I really would foresee when we come back in a couple weeks that we are putting that kind of material in front of you, and hopefully we can get it to you in advance by a couple days at least, so you can get some chance to read. We're trying to find a balance here of forcing stuff down your throat and having some open-ended opportunity at the beginning. And I already feel like I've talked too much tonight, which probably if we did a raise hand thing, there'd be a lot of hands that went up in agreement. And again, I think hopefully what we've been doing is answering questions and trying to lay some groundwork down, some basic understanding for advancement. Yeah, these are hard for you to answer. We would hope that you would take them away though, and as we give you more information, see how you combine those, and we will hit you with a whole bunch more in a couple weeks. Isaac is ready to speak.
And a quick comment. I'm sorry, Isaac, may I drop in?
Sure, sorry, Monique. Yeah.
So this may feel uncomfortable. It may feel in some aspects a little bit unproductive. However, the discussions that we're having and the questions that we're having helps us to identify what information you need to be able to make decisions. We did not want to presume what your priorities were. We did not want to come in and make those recommendations because this group, this committee, based upon the board policy, is here to help us to set priorities. As I've been taking notes, I know that we want to make sure that we're bringing to you some data on what happened in the past, what was effective, what did we bring back that ended up being more expensive. Do we want to revisit that? And these are just a few of the things. An update on our layoffs. Was it as effective as we thought it would be? What are some practices that we have now incorporated due to COVID that we may want to consider? So these types of things we'll be bringing back to you and even sending you information as quickly as we can to help guide our conversation. And as Brian said, tomorrow we're also meeting with Supes Council, our principals and the rest of our management team to glean more information. Part of the reason why we are not meeting weekly is so that we have time to gather this information, get it to you as quickly as possible so you can digest. So in the next meetings, you have more and more information to help lead us to some recommendations that we'll present to the board for consideration.
Thank you.
Thanks, Monique. Isaac, please, sir.
Yeah, I've just been thinking about my interactions with the school and things that seemed like a lot of work was being done, but I wasn't aware of how successful they were from a value standpoint. I know that some of the things that I'll go to with my kids are carnival type things, other kind of big production events at the school where there's a lot of staff involved. There are a lot of props and candy and all sorts of things there. And it seems like there's a lot of effort being put into it. And maybe that's just my perception, but I really don't know how effective they are in fundraising and doing those types of things, or if we end up spending more than we're bringing in. I guess I just don't know. They're fun things to go do, but if they're a net negative to the budget, you know, would we go do something else with the kids? We could probably go do something else. So I guess I just wanted to throw that out there of something that, you know, we've gone and done, we've participated in, but we don't know whether or not it's having the effects that we want to from a school perspective.
Thank you. Other questions? We have about 14 minutes left, and I just want to take a pulse of the group. Our next question is, are there areas where we are providing excessive levels of service compared to other districts? Do we want to begin having questions or having responses and comments on this particular question, or do we want to start wrapping up the meeting in the sense of, is there any additional information that you want us to bring for next time? So raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I see Julie's hand is up.
Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to respond to Isaac. All of those things that you mentioned, I think having done all the PTOs at all the years over at all the schools, those are nothing paid for by the school. That is completely fundraised by PTOs, and it doesn't come out. I mean, at one point there was some money. I think there was $5,000 for the entire district. That never ended up getting trickled down to us. And the PTOs have to buy their own insurance, and so I don't think any of that money comes out of the budget. Am I correct, Brian?
There's some pretty limited funds out of SCG to help put those on. Again, not a lot. I would also make the argument that in some places, some of the outreach is done by our parent liaisons, which is a staffed position out of SCG as well. But I think, yeah, Julie, you're right. Most of the stuff, if you want to call it that, for those is purchased through PTOs, et cetera.
Okay. And I'll just comment that it's not that I don't like going to them. I just didn't know how effective they were. So that's how we're going at.
Lorraine's hand is up also.
Lorraine. Lorraine, do you have a comment or a question?
She's still in the meeting.
I'm so sorry. I kept pushing. I was trying to get off of mute, and for some reason I wasn't able to. But can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. So I just wanted to ask a clarifying question to question 3. One of the examples that were provided to us were possibly data management. Could you just expand on what that means?
No, I think you got the old version where we did have some examples listed, and as Monique and I, as you see what's on the screen now, there are no examples. So ignore any examples there. It was just a rough brainstorm, and we ended up determining we wanted it simple and straightforward like it is on the screen now. Sorry for that confusion.
Oh, no worries. I just wanted to clarify what would you actually classify as that? I didn't know what kind of work would fall. I mean, I know what data management is in my world, but I didn't know what it meant for you.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Okay. Pretend I didn't read it.
And I'll provide a little more background on those questions and how we came up with these questions. School Services of California, another premier resource like FCMAT for schools here in California, work with districts all the time who are in our particular fiscal situation. and they provided input, and they provided us some of these, or actually all of these guiding questions. Then they provided those particular examples. So what you see on the handout that Rose provided you, I think it was yesterday, were not our ideas. They were general ideas for districts as a whole to be able to evaluate.
If I can jump in, I'm going to drive my favorability ratings even lower with some groups or individuals than they are, which is quite an accomplishment, frankly, at this stage of affairs. When you think about everything being on the table, and you think about levels of service and all the different kinds of things that that can mean. So certainly let me just go on record for those who watch this, everybody in here now. So the district office administrative staffing has to be one of the things that is on the table, just like everything else here as we go through. And, you know, looking at that question, levels of service applies there as well. Here's what's really unpopular to put out there. When you think about levels of service, I think you have to think about issues like class sizes, right? And everybody across California now, with few exceptions, is at the 24-to-1. However, from that 4th grade up, numbers vary widely across districts in the state. And in particular, in our secondary settings, C.A. Jacobs, our comprehensive traditional secondary settings, C.A. Jacobs and Dixon High School, our class size ratio is much lower than most places, really lower than some, and several lower than most, many if not most. And how does that play out? Well, if our class size were 33 instead of 29, as an example, not a proposal, then your calculation for staffing leads to fewer staff members, fewer FTE, full-time equivalents. So that's a piece of the puzzle, I think. Another example, again, not a popular one, is our elementary teachers, and heaven knows, especially right now, they need every minute of it. They receive 450 minutes of prep time every 10 days. This is a much higher level than most districts, both in the area and around California. We had been at 360 for a long time, and maybe this is year 4, I think, of us having science teachers. And the science teachers was a program add, but it was also a way to add more prep time for elementary teachers. We obviously all thought that that was an appropriate thing to do at that point in time. But those are just 2 examples of things that aren't considered services perhaps, but do have cost. And as many things we will end up talking about here are inevitably, will inevitably go, things like that are on the negotiations table. I think when I think back to the old budget advisory time during the Great Recession, we would hit frustration very, very frequently because, well, that's negotiable, so we can't talk about it here. We might have even done a little bit of that in recent time, I don't recall. So there are things that we don't necessarily see as services or options that do have expenses, significant expenses behind them, that again have, I believe, have to be on the table as part of the discussion. Not to say that I imagine there'll be many things that come off as, nope, this is a priority. That's the focus of this approach we're trying to have, is what are our priorities? If class sizes at 29 are a priority, okay, that's what we'll adhere to, but something else has to give in that case. If it is something the opposite, and we say that it's really important that we keep X, Y, and Z, then perhaps that's when you have to go to the negotiations table and say, you know, priorities are established as such. So I see Melissa's hand up, and I'm gonna invite her in to the conversation. Please, Melissa.
So this was kind of before my time. I mean, I was involved in PTO and some different things, but kind of towards the beginning. So I remember when my oldest was in elementary school, and the kids used to get out of school at 1:45. But then we had some budget cuts, and PE teachers were cut. So to increase that prep time, it went to 12:15 is when the students ended up getting out. And then once we added in PE teachers, the prep time stayed at, well, they still got that extra prep time on Wednesdays. And so I just am one, so I don't know all the background behind all of that. And I voted for them having extra prep time, but I'm just wondering, I just would like a total look at all this stuff, because if it was something that we might be able to cut a little bit here and there, but people can keep their jobs and we have to do less layoffs. Those are all the different areas that I would like to see to protect employment as much as possible with service for students. And maybe we can have a little bit more information about what, because that was when there were cuts long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that was when meetings were still meeting at the district office before they switched to the chambers.
It was part of it was, yeah, you're right. I don't see anyone else's hand up right now, Monique.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, we have about 3 minutes left together. So I want to take a moment, and this is similar to what I asked last time, is I'd like to know what additional information you need from us that has not been mentioned yet, what worked, what didn't work, and then just prepare for our next meeting. What do we need to bring you? So outside of what's already been mentioned, is there any other information that you would like us to bring to you for our next meeting, which is, I'll have to look at the schedule in a couple weeks.
I'll say that Kathy has her hand raised in the meantime.
Kathy.
I'll make it short and sweet. Can we get a list of the programs that are outside classroom programs? So all the stuff that could be on the table, and preferably a couple of days ahead of time so we can look at them, please, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's really the frame of our conversation with our admin team tomorrow is a lot of that. So then we'll pass it on. Absolutely. Thanks, Kathy. Isaac has his hand up as well.
Yeah, is there anything that could be provided as far as programs or any other expenses where the teachers actually feel like there could be some cuts, where they're seeing things that they feel are not getting the value that they hoped for? I think knowing that type of thing, I mean, I'm coming from an outside perspective, but the people that are actually doing the work, it would be nice to know what's most important to them and which things they feel we could probably reduce and not ruin the product they're trying to give.
Yep. Really good point as well. It's part of why we have the labor groups on this, but we also want the additional information coming from employees, and whether that's through the associations or whether that's us asking people, is something we'll talk to both sets of leaders, both the SEIU leaders and the DTA leaders. Sometimes it's better if we don't ask for the info, and sometimes it's better if we do. So thanks, Isaac. Susie's got her hand up as well.
My question was very closely aligned to Isaac's. There are different types of programs at different sites, and you know, whether that be PBIS or Leader in Me, et cetera, different things that, again, I would also be interested in finding out what the staff believes is valuable and not valuable to them. So I would like to see that as well. And how does the funds that are spent on those site programs, just exclusive to that site, how will that work exactly? If it were reduced, could you explain that to me?
I'll give you a 12-second answer.
Okay.
Most of the site-based programs that are happening are Title I funded. They're with restricted funds. And so there's not really much opportunity to eliminate them or reduce them. Although with declining enrollment, and we'll see what happens with our free and reduced lunch counts, we're going to see a decline in those title revenues coming as well. So there could have to just be contraction of things based on the numbers of students and the funding that comes related. More than 12 seconds, but you'll
real quick, just a clarification. So on those title funds, none of those title funds could be used on staffing versus
only for staffing, providing the services that are compliant with the title requirements.
Okay, but they could.
Yes. Okay. Yep, and they currently are.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I don't see any other hands, Monique.
Okay, thank you. What would you like to see, what worked well and what didn't work well, meaning you would like to see we do differently for our next meeting?
I would love to get information more than a few days in advance if possible, so I can read it and digest it a little bit better, since I'm a novice at this.
Absolutely, we'll do our best to do that. What else?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Susie?
Susie, sorry, yep.
So just to make sure I'm clear, so Monique, you will be providing us some of the budget items that we requested in terms of breakdowns of where money is being spent exactly?
Yes, I have a list of items to provide based upon our conversation today.
Okay.
It may come in a similar format as last year. It might be a different format based upon what we discussed today.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I see a question from Kathy in the chat. I'm just going to try to tackle really quickly. Is there a way of finding out how much of our general funds are going to supplement restricted funds so that we cover all our kids? Or are all the required services covered by restricted funds? Here is the big monster. Special education. Required program. We do get restricted funding from it, but we make an annual contribution from unrestricted dollars into that restricted world of, Monique, is it nearly $5 million? Nearly $6 million of our general purpose, do it as you wish, goes into providing special education services. There are no, I can't think of one, correct me if I'm wrong, Monique, restricted funds, well, you can't. There's no restricted funds helping cover a gen ed, an unrestricted purpose. You can't do it. So about $6 million going into special education. Cafeteria has been the other place where we've had to make contribution from general fund, unrestricted dollars to restricted program. But thanks for that question, Kathy. That's a big one. And special education expenses across the country skyrocketing and no relief really out of Washington whatsoever. Thanks for that question.
All right, well, thank you all for your time. Our next meeting is October 7th. We will do our best to get you information as quickly as possible so you're able to review it and digest it prior to the meeting. If there's anything that you think of that you think would be useful for the committee to have between now and that time, feel free to email me or email Rose, and we will get that information out to you all. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody.